Hi, everybody. Hello out there on Facebook. I'm Susan Maguire from Booklist, and we are coming to you live from the American Library Association offices in Chicago. And I'm so glad you could join us to talk about Kassandra Montag's After the Flood, which is the first ever Libraries Transform book pick. So hooray, welcome Kassandra.
Thank you for having me.
So let me do a little background info first so you can rest.
Okay.
So the Libraries Transform book pick, this is our first year doing it. It's a collaboration between ALA's Booklist, Libraries Transform, and Overdrive. And this is a new digital reading program that connects readers nationwide with simultaneous access to the same ebook through their public libraries using Overdrive. So readers can borrow a copy of After the Flood through October 21st, which is Monday, and with no wait lists, no holds, which if any of you have tried to support a book group in your library where they want to read a new release, you know what a sweet, sweet deal this is to be able to have everyone have the same book at the same time. And I also want to quickly encourage people to visit ilovelibraries.org, where we have some book discussion questions for the book, some more information about the program, and you can follow the discussion on Twitter with the hashtag LTBookPick, where folks have already been talking about reading the first chapter and getting hooked. And my fave so far, I didn't write down the username, but someone mentioned that she feels like she needs to learn how to fish after finishing the book. So libraries are really transforming, as you can tell. All right, let's talk about the book. So real quick, for those of you who haven't started reading it yet, we're not going to spoil anything.
Great. Okay.
But I mean, I guess we're going to tell you that it's about a flood.
Yeah.
But the title's After the Flood. All right, so After the Flood is Kassandra Montag's debut novel. It follows Myra and her 7-year-old daughter Pearl as they eke out an existence in a future world that's overrun by water, aka flooded. An encounter with a violent pirate reveals that Myra's older daughter Ro might still be alive, which sets Myra and Pearl on an adventure that touches on themes of trust, accountability, motherhood, and hope versus survival. And that really just scratches the surface of this book, which is exciting and moving. I cried at the end. We don't need to get into that, but I am very glad that we have Kassandra Montag here to talk to us more about the book.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you. And so if any of you folks out there on Facebook have questions, feel free to comment. We'll see them. We'll make sure they get asked. Mm-hmm. All right, but first my questions, most importantly. So let's start from the beginning, I guess. Where did this idea for the story come from? Was it the flood first? Did Myra come first? Or is it something else?
Right. So the world of the story came first, the flood. I was pregnant with my first son, and I started having these recurring pregnancy nightmares of a global flood. And the way I saw it was sort of like a tsunami in Nebraska, like water or the ocean had come all the way across the continent, into Nebraska. Wow. And it was just this really terrifying dream that I kept having. Mm-hmm. And after I had that dream, I started to have this image in my mind's eye of a mother on a boat, a small boat, with her young daughter. And in seeing this mother with her young daughter, I knew that she was someone who was torn between protecting the young daughter with her and trying to rescue the daughter who was separated from her, who was in danger. So I knew that she was sort of gripped by this conflict of, where am I going to put my energy, and how am I going to mother, this young child,
right,
if I go on this journey. And so that kind of really provided the crux of the narrative. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I would say, the world of the story really took root in my imagination, and then the characters sprang forth from that.
I mean, that's beautiful, and I think that kind of comes through in the book, that people are suited to the environment,
right,
but also just unsuited enough that makes some tension,
that they're struggling. Yeah.
So when I first read this book, I was like, well, here's an author who grew up on the sea and she grew up fishing and all. But I understand that's not exactly the case.
Right.
So could you talk about maybe your research, how you got all these details integrated into the story?
Yeah. So I had to research a ton because I'm from Nebraska, and I
Which
haven't
is
spent
a coastal state in the book, but not
not
yet.
in real life. Yeah. And so I had to do a ton of research into ships, sailing, and fishing primarily. And I started with children's encyclopedias because they're so basic, and my knowledge was so non-existent. I needed something basic. And I also loved about those picture encyclopedias, they would show cross sections of ships.
Yes.
And so then I could break down, okay, which part of the deck are they going to be on in this scene? And I drew out those cross sections, those sort of like bird's eye view of the ship. So I could really get a sense of, what does it feel like to move to different parts on the ship? And I also would watch YouTube videos of people fishing and sailing. So I could just try to get used to what are the small details of things that they do that we may not think about unless we're doing it all the time. And I also read a lot. I had a couple of books on survival techniques. So just things like, how do you build a fire in different conditions? Like, how do you build a fire if it's windy? Or how do you smoke a fish? And so all of those sort of like survival techniques were really important in the research for the book. And I tried to just really invest in that. Yeah.
Was there anything that really surprised you? Because I, grew up going to Girl Scouts, and I know how to set a fire, how to light a fire, but not like on a boat during a storm.
Right, yeah. I mean, I think what surprised me maybe the most is just how difficult it would be to acclimate to life on the sea. Particularly what for me would be scary, and they talk about in the book a little bit, is getting access to fresh water. So in the book they have these large cisterns to collect rainwater, but other than that they have to be really careful, especially if they're going on a long journey, because they don't have great access to fresh water. So I think that was maybe the scariest thing to me, is just thinking about like rationing fresh water.
Right,
and how
especially
scary
when
that
you're
would be.
surrounded by water.
Yeah.
Well, and so I don't know if you know this, but we're going through a little bit of a climate situation now. So it's hard not to read after the flood and think about our current climate crisis, really.
Right.
Was that something that you were thinking about as you were writing the book, or was it hard to keep the present and the future separate, or was that not something you worried about?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, those concerns were there because, when I guess going back to the genesis of my idea for the book, I felt like when I had that dream about a global flood, it was really a transparent metaphor for my anxieties about becoming a mother.
Yeah.
And, some of those anxieties were about how was I going to handle the disparate responsibilities of being a mother and being a citizen in the larger world. But it was also anxieties about what kind of world am I bringing my child into, and how is that world changing in negative ways. So climate change was a part of that anxiety. So I think I let climate change inform the book emotionally. I didn't want the book to be pedantic or preachy, and try to push politics on anyone. So I mean, that's not at the forefront of the book. It's something that's more like an emotional engine. This sense of how is the world changing, and how are we going to protect the future and protect especially children who will be the future.
Right.
So
that's really interesting. And I think a lot of that comes through in how you express things, and you have a background as a poet. And After the Flood did not strike me as a poet's novel because the plot is so propulsive.
Right.
And I don't think of poetry as plot driven.
It's not.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm not an expert, but so were there things that you were able to take from your poetry training that helped the book, or things you had to unlearn, or how did being a poet affect your writing of the book?
That's a great question. So I wrote poetry for about a decade before I wrote After the Flood, and it did affect my writing in ways that were helpful, but also, as you say, in ways that I almost had to unlearn. For one, the ways in which it was helpful is that I felt like I could capture a strong voice in prose. Poetry often has this very sort of electric, this presence to it, you know, because the language is so rich or so visceral or so precise. And so I felt like that was to my advantage. One of the things that was not to my advantage in being a poet is exactly what you mentioned, the plot.
Right.
You know, I felt like I had to
You
learn
have so many words.
Yeah, I had to learn how to be a storyteller, really, because you know, even though some of my poetry was narratively based, it still wasn't a 400-page story, you know. And so I learned a lot about story from reading other novels, from actually just sometimes watching television or movies and kind of breaking down, okay, how are they transforming this character over a couple of different scenes, or is there a reversal of power over the course of this episode? You know, kind of those things that really have narrative momentum and push the story forward. You know, it's not just about action scenes, it's also about the action that happens within the character, you know, so those kind of like reversals or the dynamic sort of character changes.
Did you have any favorites that stood out?
Any favorite shows or movies?
Yeah, narrative lesson, or that taught you good narrative lessons?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I think the overall really good narrative lesson that I needed, it was something actually that a professor told me back in grad school, which was thinking about when you're writing something, the difference between stillness and movement. And that every book can have a little bit of both, but particularly a novel, it needs a fair bit of movement. And part of that, to me, I pictured in terms of poetry, I think of as very vertical. Like you're going deeper and deeper and deeper into an experience. And you can have that in novels as well, where you go deep into an experience, but you also have this sort of horizontal movement where you're moving on to the next thing. And just having that image in my head helped to remind me in scenes, like, okay, I need to push this further and you know, introduce something new. So,
right.
Yeah.
Wow. So that's okay. I keep saying that's exciting after everything you said, but it's exciting. I can't help it.
Yeah.
So we are reading it. The staff here at ALA is reading it, and I got some questions from them.
Okay, great.
So while we wait for some questions to come in from Facebook, I thought I'd ask a little bit of our staff questions. So this is sort of about this, the world that you built. How challenging was it to imagine a world with almost no dry land? And did you ever feel like you wrote yourself into a corner, so to speak? Like, man, I wish this didn't have to be wet over here.
Oh, that's funny. Sorry, what was that? The first half of the question?
How challenging was it to imagine a world with almost no dry land?
Yeah. It was challenging, but I felt like it was also the most fun part in a lot of ways, to just try to imaginatively experience a different kind of place. So I think, you know, I spent a lot of time almost trying to like meditate on, you know, what would it look like if you dove down into a house after it's been completely covered with water, and really just trying to imaginatively inhabit that. So I think that part for me was fun. The part that was hard, though, was trying to get things accurate across the world. I did spend a lot of time studying elevation of different cities because I wanted it to be accurate, you know, where I have the water level in the book, which right now I can't remember what the exact number was, but I had it written down and I had drawn maps.
I'm sure
you know,
someone
like
will correct us.
Right. Like this country is above water, this country isn't. And so like keeping track of that was a bit of a challenge. And as I revised the book and had different, you know, episodes or different events, I think I changed a couple of times where the water was, because I did need certain places to be above water and certain places not to be. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I remember just when I was first thinking about the book, so Myra ends up journeying to Greenland, and that was a big part of like where I could have the water levels. I needed Greenland to be above water. Greenland has a higher elevation than, for instance, Iceland, which is also fairly high up north, but Greenland has a higher elevation. So
I don't think I knew that.
So that was kind of just like an important part about, you know, why that's where she goes, because it has a high enough elevation it would still exist.
Yeah, and I think reading it, parts of it felt almost like you're reading a fantasy novel, and that sort of world building. I mean, you know, you're picturing the things that you see when you first go into Lord of the Rings land. It's not called Lord of the Rings land, but you know.
Right.
But yeah, it felt unreal and real at the same time. It was really beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
So here's a Facebook question. Will there be a sequel And does Roe have a new storyline?
Okay. So I want there to be a sequel. I'm not working on it yet, but I have ideas for what I would like to do. I would love the next book to start about 10 years in the future from where we left off, and to really focus on Pearl and have Pearl be the viewpoint character of the book. And I have a lot of ideas about what I want to do with that civilization that is just now beginning to form in the valley, and how the conflict with the Lily Black will continue in those people's lives who have already sort of had that battle, you know.
Yeah, because we talked a little bit when we spoke for the ilovelibraries.org website. We talked a little bit about how the future, or how the civilization was being rebuilt, and how it seemed like it was being rebuilt through violence and on the backs of women.
Right.
And that you were maybe offering something a little bit more hopeful at the end.
Right, yeah, exactly. At the end, you know, I want there to be this sense of hope that community and civilization can continue, but that it's pretty hard won, and that it is, that there are a lot of sacrifices and losses along the way, because to me that felt realistic. But I do want there to be that sense of hope, the sense that civilization can go on in hopefully more positive forms.
Yeah.
And I would love to explore in the second book how that plays out, and what are sort of the fights that people have to fight to make that, have that be more of the focus. Because this first book is really much, you know, it's kind of like a family saga in a way. It's about a mother's journey. And so I kind of would like to widen the scope with the second book, keep it in this world with a lot of these characters, but let us see a little bit more about the rebuilding of civilization.
So there's a question about Roe, and so I guess without going into too much about the ending, as you were writing, were you thinking about, like, what is Roe doing at this point in the story? And that's not really something you see.
Right. Yeah, it's not something you see, but I actually did write scenes of Roe living in the valley. But I ended up taking them out of the final draft of the book because I wanted the reader to just themselves try to think about, you know, how is she living there?
Right.
And I also wanted to kind of save some material for future books.
Yeah.
So.
And this was so focused on Myra.
Right.
That, I think that was good. All right, here's another one. So you sort of addressed this a little bit, but coming from a poetry background, did you find it hard to make the transition to novel writing? Did you get, did you have folks in your life who knew you as a poet? Were they surprised that you were writing a big book?
I think so. I think some people were a little surprised, particularly, like you said, it has like sort of an action propulsive plot, and I think they were particularly surprised about that. Sometimes when poets go to write a novel, it's a very quiet voice driven novel, maybe sometimes a little bit shorter, and so I do think some people were a little surprised, like, oh, you're writing this sort of like long, you know, post-apocalyptic saga.
Yeah.
You know, so there was a little bit of surprise, and the transition was difficult. I mean, I felt like it took a long time to learn about storytelling. I will say that while I was writing poetry, I also was writing short stories occasionally, so it wasn't that I hadn't done any fiction, but I hadn't done it extensively. So I felt like I still needed to really develop those skills.
Yeah, so how long do you think it took you all together to write After the Flood? I mean, can you even
So it took
calculate?
2 years to write After the Flood.
All right.
Before I did that, though, I did have half of what I call my like half of a failed novel. So After the Flood is my first.
I feel like every writer
novel.
has that. That's
right.
good.
Yeah.
You need that.
Right. Yeah. I felt like I learned a lot in that book, and I even used certain elements from that book in After the Flood, and so that was really helpful. I mean, sometimes you need to just give yourself a project to fail on, and then that just gives you so much to go from for your next project.
Well, that's good and inspiring.
Yeah.
I like it. So let's talk about libraries a little bit.
Yeah.
So you did all this really interesting research. Was there any particular way that libraries played a role in that, or just how have libraries influenced your writing life or your reading life?
Yeah, I mean, well, first, libraries have influenced my reading and writing life just because I felt like they really introduced me to the world of books, because as a child, I spent so much time at the library. I grew up in a small town. There wasn't really a lot to do or a lot of places to go, but we had a fabulous local library, and it always just felt like so many different worlds were available in that one place.
Yeah.
And so
now, usually that formula leads to someone becoming a librarian. So I'm surprised that you're a novelist.
Right.
But that's all right.
Yeah.
That's good.
So it's always felt like really magical for me in that way. And for After the Flood, I did something actually I went to the library with my young boys. I have 2 sons, they're 4 and 3, and I would take them to the library a lot when I was working on After the Flood. And I remember during one of our visits, they pulled down a book, and it was one of those kids' picture encyclopedias, and it was called The Far North, and it was all about people who live up in the north, you know, so up in Greenland or Alaska or like the upper parts of Canada. And in that book, I learned about the myth of Sedna. And Sedna is a major part of After the Flood because the ship that she joins is called Sedna. And Sedna is, it's part of Inuit mythology that's essentially about a young goddess who's a giant. And she is so hungry because she's a giant that she tries to eat her parents. And when she tries to eat her parents, her father is enraged, and he takes her on his kayak and he throws her overboard. And she's clinging to the kayak, and he cuts off her fingers, and her fingers become walruses and whales and fish, and she becomes the ruler of the deep. And to me, it was just like such a powerful myth that captured really like the very sort of difficult dynamic, I think, of desire and violence, even a little bit about the relationship between child and parent and what we need from each other and how we fail each other, which is something that I really wanted to explore in After the Flood. Myra loves her children, and she wants to do everything for them, but she still fails them in certain ways.
Right.
You know,
and there's
every
almost no way
parent
she
does.
can help them both at the same time.
Exactly,
So, yeah.
right. And so, you know, that myth was so helpful to me. And it was also helpful that I just found it randomly. That's what I love about libraries, is that I couldn't have like thought of it because I didn't know about it. But I discovered it because I was in a place where there were tons of books. And so my son could pull any book off the shelf and it could inspire me.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful serendipity.
Yeah.
I hope that you told the children's librarian that, because sometimes when books get pulled off the shelf, it's less of an appealing situation.
Exactly.
I love it. So here's another question. So have you heard the term Cli-Fi before? Okay, so Cli-Fi or climate-related fiction, it's becoming more and more popular.
Yeah.
And I would put After the Flood in there, even though you don't talk specifically about what happened.
Right.
But I would still put it in a place where if people are interested in Cli-Fi, they would like it. So would you write another Cli-Fi-ish novel, or is there some other aspect of the environment that interests you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would if I had the right idea for it. I think, you know, for me it would all come down to, do I have something that's compelling enough, something that's different? You know, I've heard of other writers writing books about droughts or, you know, other kinds of natural disasters. So I would probably feel like I need something that's a little bit unique. But I am very interested in the environment, and you know, since I grew up out, you know, outside of town in a rural area, I spent a lot of time outside, and so nature was always part of my life. So I do like writing about nature, and part of nature is natural disasters.
Right.
So,
Yeah, especially in Nebraska.
Right.
With the tornadoes. Tornadoes are the scariest.
Maybe I could write a tornado novel.
Oh my gosh,
That's
tornado dystopia. My palms are already sweating. I'm too scared to read it. Well, so now that we're talking about natural disasters, let's totally switch gears. Okay. And I was showing you my notes that I was taking while I was reading the book. And, you know, I have a lot of really intelligent things written down. And one of the things I wrote was that all the men are attractive. Because I am an intellectual reader. And how do I want to make this a question? I mean, I was just sort of like joking around about it, but I am a huge romance reader, and I feel like I look for the happy ending or like potential emotional connections in everything. And so, I mean, I appreciated that there was like a Daniel to sweep up onto her boat, and he's cute.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he needs to be cute too. Yeah, no, I like that. I mean, I think,
but maybe
and I wanted
you can be less picky in an apocalypse.
Right. But she still gets a couple of handsome men on board. You know,
she's been through enough.
She's been through enough, so give her that at least. You know, because like you said, I mean, the novel is bleak at times, but I did want there to be moments of beauty and moments of connection. You know, like you use that word connection, and that's so true. I love love stories, and this is also, you know, it's about a natural disaster, but it's also a love story, because it's a love story between mother and child, but it's also a love story for Myra, you know, with meeting Daniel and even just opening herself up, because she has such trust issues. You know, she's been scarred and been through so much. So, I mean, that is a big part of it. So I wanted there to be a little bit of that energy to it.
Right. And I mean, because she is like such a tough character, because she has to be.
Yeah.
It seemed like even on the Sedna, there were love stories, with all of the crew there. She gets to know them and
Right.
gets to trust them, and
Exactly.
really.
I wanted, there to be that companionship and connection, and how she learns that even though she has trouble trusting people, that there's value in it. So, yeah.
And that's what's going to save the world, is human connection. Guys, we figured it out.
Yep.
So let's see, what else can we, here we go. A Facebook question just came in. How many people are still alive in this world? How many people survived? Did you have an idea of that?
I did. I wrote it down when I was writing the book, but numbers don't stay in my head.
Okay.
Unfortunately, if I remember correctly, I want to say that it was a pretty small number. I want to say that it was maybe 5 to 10% of the world's population. So I mean, this is a massive apocalypse.
Yeah.
You know? So whatever 5 to 10% of the world's population is would be approximately how many people. So I mean, it's very much like reducing the world to like a very small, number of people.
Did you envision other, like some areas of the world having more survivors than others? I mean, because she is in sort of, where do they start? Like British Columbia?
Yeah, British Columbia, and then they kind of go down. So it's kind of in the Western Hemisphere for most of the book. And as far as like, do certain areas have more survivors than others? Yes, definitely areas that have higher altitudes.
Right.
Because the way I envisioned it is that the massive floods happened fairly quickly once the water really started rising, and so people fled to mountaintops. So those countries that have very low elevation, or low elevation to almost no mountains at all,
right,
they could be completely wiped out.
Yeah. Although those are often the people who know how to survive on the water.
That's true. Yeah, and I did think about that. That certain places, I was thinking like the Netherlands and Japan, I could imagine them outfitting themselves with ships to try to, sail away. So yeah, there's a little bit of a mixture, but I still felt like they were at a little bit of a disadvantage. Yeah.
Here's another Facebook question. Do you think that the climate is the most pressing issue of our time, or, that's the question.
That's a hard question because there are a lot of pressing issues. So it's difficult for me, I feel like, to answer that definitively. To me, I do feel, again, just going back to emotionally, like what I think about, it does feel like it is one of the most. I don't know if I would say the one and only, but one of them. It is a top concern, I think, for me, and I think for a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, and you've written a book about a climate disaster. Do you think that there's a way that literature and stories can help people cope with these pressing issues? Or, is that something that you thought about when you were writing, is I want to make people maybe not feel so bad? Or
Right, yeah. No, I mean, it definitely was something I thought about probably more in revision and afterwards, is this sense of how I do think that stories help us cope, because they offer us a reprieve from our life, while they also can help sort of emotionally prepare us for different possibilities.
Yeah.
And, my intent with the book was to, provide a little bit of hope, and also for a sense of how communities, can work together in these sort of disasters, and that's kind of what happens in the second half of the book, not so much the first half, but more so in the second, when the group is really banding together. And so I do think that literature can serve that role of really enlarging our mind and giving us imaginative possibilities for, what are things that could happen. I think literature can also provide comfort as well. So
yeah, and I think as somebody who's like, I mean, I love the water, but I'm very afraid of drowning.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's something, I don't want to say comforting, about reading the storm scenes, but there was something about that, the adrenaline that came from reading it.
Right.
But, I mean, it was sort of a release
as
a reader.
That's true. Yeah, it's like it's a little bit cathartic, and I think that when you watch other people surviving, it can also give you a sense of perseverance that maybe you can survive too, and maybe make you think about, well, what are the costs of survival? What does it mean I need to do? To really, and I don't mean do in a practical sense. I mean do more in like a value-based sense. Like, what are my connections like in life? Am I trusting people? Am I working with other people? So, yeah.
So let's just do one more Facebook question that's kind of plot related, I guess. Was there a reason that you picked 7 years for Rose App? So there's 7 years between the prologue which will just tear your heart out if you haven't read it yet. And then the bulk of the story is 7 years later. So was there a reason why you chose that length of time? Or?
Yeah, the main reason was that I knew that Myra was pregnant with her second child when Ro was taken, and I knew that Pearl was going to be around the age of 7, somewhere around there. I wanted her to be not so young that she was kind of a preschooler, but I didn't want her to be so old that she was that sort of preteen age. So I knew I wanted her to be roughly somewhere in the realm of 6, 7, or 8, somewhere in there. So that was the main reason that I chose the 7 years.
Yeah, and it seems like with Pearl, she's old enough to start exhibiting some signs that what she has lived through has affected her.
Right.
And that was really heartbreaking. And it was heartbreaking to watch Myra realize that too.
Yeah, and that's so much a part of Myra's sort of transformation, and Myra starting to face some of the choices that she's made is seeing the effect in her child, of some of the, more negative choices Myra has made.
Right, and some of it was totally out of her control, which I imagine for any parent is a tough thing to see.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And the snakes.
Yeah.
Now listen, I'm afraid of snakes, so this was rough. But Pearl is still a delight.
Yeah, she is fierce. I mean, that is something. I loved how she was like a little wild thing,
I mean, if you haven't finished the book, there's like a scene toward the end where Pearl comes through in a way that is victorious and alarming.
It is, yeah.
So
that was one of my favorite scenes to write. It was really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
I don't want to say too much.
We're doing like Chris Farley, remember when you wrote that scene?
I know.
It was so good. All right. So I think we have, we can just about wrap it up.
Yeah.
Unless you have anything you want to add, any shout outs to the library people out there?
I appreciate being here. I really am honored to have my book chosen as the first Libraries Transform book pick. Like I said earlier, libraries have meant so much to me throughout my life. So this is an honor and a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, I'm so glad you could join us.
Yeah.
And if you haven't gotten enough Kassandra Montag and you're in the Chicago area, she'll be at Anderson's in LaGrange tonight at 7. Is that right?
That's right.
Reading and talking about the book.
That's right. Yep. Reading, talking, signing.
All that stuff. And just a quick reminder that for more information on Libraries Transform Book Pick, for more book club materials on After the Flood, visit ilovelibraries.org. And easy to remember because you all love libraries. And that's it. Thank you for Facebook Living, everyone.
Thank you.
Freeze.